And there are lots of times in life when we get to have a really, really fun exchange. Today we get to have one of those, and we've got a great guy with us. His name is Dr. Go ahead, Rochelle.
Dr. David Uga Chotka is how we're going to remember it. Dr. David Chotka gets to be here with us today. Please remember you can follow along on his website, which is quite unique, at www.spiritequip.com to talk about all that good stuff. Right, Kevin?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. He's a multi-published author. He travels the world talking about his books and the things he does. He's been to Japan and the Philippines. I know a little bit about the Philippines, but in any event, why don't we go ahead and get started with Dr. David right now? There's a moment in every life when you decide to rise.
To stand taller than your fear.
To speak louder than your doubt.
To chase the vision that sets your soul on fire.
This is that moment. And here we walk it together with stories that awaken, voices that inspire,
and truths that set you free.
This is Positive Talk Radio with Kevin
and with Rochelle,
where hope has a voice.
And that voice is yours.
And welcome to the show, everybody. We've got Dr. David here. And Dr. David, I'm not sure if setting your soul on fire is appropriate when we talk to you, because I think that means that we're going to be...
That's the wrong direction.
That's the wrong direction. But when we talk about set your soul on fire, we mean to give you something really wonderful and positive to think about. And that's what you do. So you've been on the show before. It's been a while. How you been?
I've been very well. In fact, I just got back from a trip to Edmonton working with a Filipino church of all things. And they have invited me to return to the Philippines with them. And I'm going to be in Ethiopia, and I'm going to be in Nigeria, and possibly going to be in Egypt in the next couple of months. So I said, Lord, I was born a rambling man, but it means I'm actually talking about him while I'm rambling.
So, Jake, do you have like a family at home or do you just, are you a vagabond that travels the globe?
Well, my oldest son is married. My daughter lives with us. But my wife and I often travel together, and I don't like to travel alone. I'll just tell you why. All kinds of marvelous pastors have been idiots, just absolute idiots. And so it's best to travel in company with one's spouse. So I don't know if you're aware of how bad it is, but you could even travel alone and they accuse you falsely and it's not true, et cetera, et cetera. So I like to travel.
No.
Yes, they do. Have you had that happen to you?
No, I don't travel.
No, I need to be accused falsely.
That's it. I have to watch, because I have a show called Positive Talk. Yes. I can't flip anybody off in the car anymore, and I have to be nice to people when I go to the grocery store, and even though I do that naturally, but and stuff. So I don't want somebody to be able to say, "Oh, you're from Positive Talk Radio, really?" Then maybe you should read some of the things that you say. In any event, Dr. David, he is a minister, Rochelle, and he's written a bunch of books, and we're going to talk about several of them. We're going to talk about the Lord's Prayer a little bit, and what it means to him when he breaks it down. And that's one of the teaching moments that you give, isn't it, Doctor? That you
in fact, I just did that in Edmonton. Yes. Most people who grew up in any kind of church at all, whether it's Roman Catholic or whether it's Baptist or Presbyterian or Brethren or Pentecost or whatever, they have prayed that prayer over and over and over again. And they pray it like this: Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. It's the end of the prayer meeting, or it's a sacramental moment in the middle of a structured service. I know you used to be a Lutheran. And people say it because, Jesus told us we should do that. But most people haven't stopped long enough to figure out what each of those key words means. And I had a defining moment that was actually rooted in embarrassment. So I was hosting a conference with an international presenter. Actually, I'm a Canadian. I live in Canada, and I was pastoring a church in Canada. And we brought in this presenter from the United States. And he had been a believer all his days. And he was like 55 or 60 or something like this. And he had been teaching us about small group theory and how to make small groups more warm and more acceptable, et cetera, et cetera. And he finished his presentations and he had an hour left. So I said, well, why don't you talk about your prayer life? And he looked at me very strangely. I was the host pastor, and it was a national conference in my local church. And so all of my peers in ministry were in the congregation. And this guy was a professor of theology from Fuller in Pasadena, California. And he was standing in my church, and he had just been overseas to Korea, and he'd met a pastor who was the pastor of the largest church in the history of Christianity. There were 850,000 people in small groups attached to his church. It was 1/10 the population of the city of Seoul, Korea. And he was the pastor of that church. And so this guy, listen, in those days, my congregation was 800 people. And if you wanted to talk to me, you had to call me a week out unless it was an emergency. And so think about this. How often are you going to get an appointment with a guy who's got a church of 850,000 people? Anyway, this man, who is an instructor on, small group ministries and so on, wanted to figure out the secret sauce behind this guy's church. And so he was praying about what he should ask. And he said, I'm going to ask him about his prayer life. So he looked at him and he said, I understand you pray hours a day, every day. And the man said, well, I do. Yes, I do. I said, well, what do you do during all those hours when you're praying? And he said, it's very simple. For the first 3 hours, I use the Lord's Prayer. And after that, other models. Because I'm sitting on the platform and this guy has just got back and he's still processing what happened to him. And so he looks, and my peers are all looking at him, and he asks the obvious question that every one of us was thinking. What do you do? Repeat it? And then the guy said, the thing that changed my life from that point forward, he said, and the guy's name was Carl George. He said, Dr. George, have you never looked at what Jesus meant by the term Father? And at that point, I had 3 earned degrees, 2 of them in theology. All of my peers were across the this whole network of churches. They were all there. Every one of them looked as flummoxed as I was feeling. And I looked at this guy and I could saw he was genuinely disturbed by the fact that he'd never done the study. And he said, well, I pray using the title, but I haven't got a clue what it meant. And he said, well, how can you obey Jesus if you don't know what he's talking about? Then it hit me like a fell blow that I didn't know what I was praying. And so how can you obey when you don't understand what you don't know? And then he goes on to the word heaven. He said, well, do you ever look at what the Bible teaches about heaven, Dr. George? And he said, well, I believe in heaven, but I've never studied it. And then he went on to the word name, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. And all of us had prayed those prayers. And the only consolation I had was that I'd actually studied the doctrine of the kingdom. So when it came to your kingdom come, I knew what he was talking about. Prior to that, I didn't know what those key words meant. So I made a commitment. And that was way back in the 1990s, that I would get a bunch of notebooks and I would, here's what they looked like. I'd get a notebook like this, and I would write on the title on the first one. This was Father. The next one was heaven. The next one was name. The next one was will. The next one was kingdom. And I got all the key words of the Lord's Prayer in front of me, and I put them into a large binder. Then I opened up my Bible, and what I do in the Bible, I have 6 markers in my Bible. I'm always reading through 6 sections of the scripture to make myself fluent in the Bible. So I'd read the Old Testament prophets, and I'd read the law, and I'd read the writings, and I'd read the Gospels, and I'd read the epistles, and I'd read the Catholic epistles, and so on. Every time I ran across one of those words, I would circle it, I would open up my journal, and I would write what I thought the thing meant. I did that for 12 years. And at the end of that 12 years, a guy came into my church who asked if I was writing anything. And at that point, I had turned it into a training manual for my leaders. And then he said, well, maybe I should publish it. And actually, my purpose in writing the resource was not to train me or to train my elders. It was actually because I was working with the poor and impoverished churches of North Uganda, helping them rebuild after the authoritarian regime of Idi Amin. And that awful man who called himself, a warlord, Joseph Kony, who was, raping children and making brothers and sisters kill each other. And it was this awful stuff. I went into that. And I took my research on the Lord's Prayer pattern into them and gave it to them. And I gave it away free. We raised money and we gave away 16,000 copies of the first draft of that book. And here's what I discovered in the course of time. Most people don't want deep. Most people want to understand fast. so, so, so about a year ago, I decided that I would shrink it down to a 2-week exercise. And so I wrote a little book called 6 Short Steps to Pray the Prayer. And there's a pattern to the prayer. And I did something very Baptist. I'm not Baptist, but I did something very Baptist. The Baptists like to do three hymns, 3 points in a poem, or all the same letter at the same time, all alliteration. So I took the Lord's Prayer and I broke it down into Prayer, prayer.
How inventive.
So the first part was praise the Father. The second part was request the kingdom. The third part was ask for provision. The fourth part was yield your sins. The part after that was engage the enemy. And the last was rejoice in God's victory. And that is the pattern of the Lord's Prayer. And so what I did was I made it simple because most people don't want to go deep. Now, I have a deep, this is the deep one here. It's 400 pages, 8.5 by 11. And you'll get cross-eyed after day 3 because it's information, right?
Well, and Dr. David, I have to ask you because this came up, and speaking of embarrassing moments, this came up when I went to a Catholic church.
Okay.
I grew up Lutheran.
Yes.
And it said, and at the end of the prayer, it's, and deliver us from evil, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Yeah. They don't say that part.
That's right. You don't.
That ends at deliver us from evil.
Yes.
And so I kept going, and everybody started looking at me like, what the hell is he doing?
Well, they got a renegade Lutheran in the Catholic Church.
You preach it,
Kevin. So, yes. So you're asking, why is that not included in some?
Well, I'm assuming that it was part of Martin Luther's catechism when he broke away from the Catholic Church, that he didn't feel like the Lord's Prayer. Aren't you impressed, Rochelle, that I even know this? That the Lord's Prayer wasn't complete enough, so he added that portion into it. Am I correct in that? Is that close?
Not entirely. What happened is there's a manuscript tradition, and actually the New Testament is the most well-documented book in history. There are thousands and thousands of copies, and there are early translations and so on. And there were variations in the manuscripts. And the King James translation that most of us grew up with, if you were an old Lutheran, you'd know this, used ancient language and so on. But there was sort of a received text, and it had that line, yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. But the earliest manuscripts don't have it. At around 100 AD, there was a document called the Didache, which means the teaching. And it was within the lifetime of the early apostles. And that phrase, yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever, was in the Didache. And some early manuscripts have put that in, and some have left it out. And so you have this variation of the manuscript tradition. But listen, the point is, when you read Jewish prayer, every Jewish prayer does not end with dealing with darkness. Every Jewish prayer ends with praise. And so it's inconceivable in my mind that didn't belong to the teaching of Jesus. In fact, if you read the Gospels, you will see that there are sayings of Jesus that aren't in the Gospels. There's one, it is better to give than to receive, which sounds like Luke, and we say it all the time when we're talking about common conversation. It's actually not in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, the four Gospels. It's in Acts of the Apostles in the 24th chapter. And so there's this floating Jesus tradition, and all those sayings got reduced to writing about a generation after Christ rose. And so you have four different Gospels, each of them taking various aspects of what I call the Jesus tradition and producing, how do I say this? A preaching document? Would that be the best way to describe it? I am doing a commentary on Mark's Gospel. In fact, it's being released today. So for those who are listening, if this is recorded, that first volume is going to come out today, April 16, which is the Thursday in 2026. And so I'm working my way through the Greek text of Mark and translating that into contemporary English. It sounds more Canadian than American, I will tell you that. Although I don't say A at the end of my sentences in the translation. Now, you know how to spell Canada, right? It's C-A-N-A-D.
Yep. I never looked at it that way. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. But Rochelle, what do you think of this so far?
I think that it's very interesting. So many perspectives that we have from even so long ago that we still carry now and how they're being played out. But Doctor, I love the church that I go to. It's a non-denominational Christian church. And it is because it's such an open, tangible message for humanity, to really talk about not what is just being said, but what does it even mean? Because I think we go through our lives kind of doing the same thing, whether we're reading something, maybe having an experience, or meeting a new person, and we're kind of reading things a little bit wrong. And so it teaches you to start from the basics of what we've had to look at.
Well, let me tell you the heresy that has infected every church across all cultures all across the planet.
Okay.
Almost all of us take the culture that we're in and lay it on top of the biblical text and assume that the text and our culture are the same. And good preaching, good exegesis, good study analyzes the culture in which the document was prepared and ferrets out and translates into current culture the intention and the meaning of the original language. And churches go wrong when they take current culture and they place it on top of theirs. It's on top of the scripture. Now, non-denominational church, I suspect you don't say the Lord's Prayer every Sunday, but you would know it. And it would show up when you're at a prayer meeting on a Tuesday night or something. And you'd finish the prayer meeting by saying the thing. But again, I suspect you say it fast and walk away because you're done. And that's not the intention. So the way I would describe this, like there's two versions of the Lord's Prayer, one in Luke, one in Matthew. One's longer, one's shorter. And the reason why it shows up in variant forms is because it was a teaching tool. Now, I'm a teacher, and whenever I go from one context to another, I change the content slightly to adapt to the audience. I always do that. So when I'm speaking to an American constituency, it's different than when I'm speaking to a Filipino group, or when I'm speaking to. I was just in Vietnam, and I was in Cambodia, and when I made a bad mistake, I almost used an American illustration in Vietnam, and there was a war there. So the interpreter looked at me and said, I don't think you should use that illustration. It's not going to work here. And then, of course, I went, oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. So here's the thing. When Jesus was teaching a different context, the outline is identical, but the content is slightly different. And so that prayer that I said to you at the beginning fits the Luke shorter version and fits the Matthew longer version. It's both there. Now the variation around the how do you say this? The variation around the details doesn't matter so much, and I'll just tell you why. If you could picture a long wall, say 28 feet long and 10 feet high, and you put each of Matthew's Gospel's chapters in each one of those columns, then you made the Lord's Prayer 3 times the size. I would look at you and say, now, can you see that Lord's Prayer is right there in chapter 6? And you'd nod your head and say, yes, amen, hallelujah, that's good. Praise the Lord. Independent church, they probably see that more than we in a Lutheran church, right?
It depends on the era.
Yeah, I suppose. So then I'd say to you, what's your favorite color, Brichelle? I'd ask you for your favorite color. So what's your favorite color?
Purple.
Purple. Okay, so I'd circle the word Father, and I'd draw lines all through on the wall through those 28 chapters to all the places where the word Father is used from that prayer. And there would be 56 lines coming from that prayer to different spots in Matthew. Now, heaven. So I got to say to you, Kevin, it can't be purple. So what's your favorite color as long as it's not purple? See, what's your favorite color?
Red.
Okay, so red. So I circle the word heaven in red. And then I draw lines to all the places where the word heaven is used in Matthew's gospel. There's more than 60 of those in Matthew's gospel. There's 28 chapters. So then we go to the word name. There's only 12 lines there. Get to the word kingdom. It's everywhere. Like we're talking like 60 plus uses of that word in Matthew's gospel. And by the time you get to word 6 or 7, all of your Matthew on the wall is a rainbow. It's an absolute rainbow. And the point is that the Lord's Prayer was never intended just to be something that was memorized. It was intended to be a compendium of all of Jesus' teaching. Because in the early church, they didn't have books, and they most certainly didn't have iPhones, which may in fact be a great blessing.
I mean, I can tell you, I know all the stuff, but I don't have it memorized, and
Yes.
I don't know if I ever will. And there's a big thing too right now, Dr. David, where people are chasing for this higher power, but religion and spirituality tend to kind of clash together rather than bond. And for me, I consider them to be hand in hand. You kind of can't have one without the other. So I'd love to think of that when we come back. Kevin, do you want to take this next break, right? You take a first break?
Let's take a break real quick.
Okay, make sure that you visit spiritequip.com. He has everything plus more there and much more to talk about, but I must ask you that question when we come back.
And remember that question, because we'll be right back. We often think of courage as a shield, a thick wall to prove that we are untouchable. We believe that to be strong is to be invulnerable, hiding our doubts and our soft edges behind a mask of certainty. But true courage isn't found in the armor. It's found in the willingness to take it off. Vulnerability is the act of showing up and being seen exactly as you are, even when you cannot control the outcome. It's the bravery to say, I'm hurting, I don't know, or I need help. When we hide our struggles, we also hide our humanity. It's only when we are vulnerable can we truly connect, truly learn, and truly heal. Armor can protect you, but only vulnerability can transform you. And welcome back to Positive Talk. My name is Kevin, and Rochelle is right there. And Rochelle, who are we talking to again?
Dr. David Chotka.
Chotka.
Chotka. Oh my gosh. Uga Chotka. I gotta just remember. I gotta have
That's
that.
it. Yeah. Guardians of the Galaxies. You're set.
Okay. Dr. David Chotka is our guest today. Make sure you go to his website and follow along with us at spiritequip.com. And Dr. David, I have to ask you, Kevin, please pitch in if you want to, because a lot of times we see people who are either spiritual or they are religious, right? But it doesn't make sense for me in my mind as common sense to not have the two be able to mend, because you can't understand one without the other.
Yes.
In so many ways, shapes, and forms. So what do you think about?
Well, listen, I know this about you. You decided that you were going to do this thing called Positive Talk Radio because you were fed up with all this negative stuff. Mm-hmm. So you organized around your purposes. And spirituality that is unorganized is an unorganized mess.
There.
So what do you have to do? If you are with people who are of like faith or like mind and want to go deeper in what it is that you believe, you organize around that so that you can do something as simple as pay the light bill. Yeah. It's important to be able to do that. So the problem comes when faith gets fossilized and you have this kind of, how do I say this, rigid worldview that doesn't allow you to deal with the exigencies of life. So you have stiff traditions and you have open traditions. In fact, I suspect this is true in America. I know it's particularly true in Canada. People don't like organized religion. They like reality. Yes. The trouble is, if you don't organize, you don't pay the pastor. And I'm a pastor and I like to get paid.
Come on, I'm a podcaster and I don't get paid, so why should you get paid? You know.
Well, I hope that you make a little money on the side or something like this. But
no, I have a team of 15 that I take care of. I've got a little flock of people that I take care of. But Doctor, I have to ask you, because you've been on the show a couple of times. I love the fact that you are very learned in what you do and stuff. But there are some things that I wanted to ask you about. If I could be so bold, can I ask you a couple of questions?
You have never been anything less than bold, my friend.
Which gospel came first? I have always heard it was Mark came first. Right. Is that true?
That's my new book. It's called Mark My Words, a devotional paraphrase. So it is, yes. And I can.
How about that for a segue?
Yeah, I didn't even plan that. But you can tell this very easily. It's a very simple thing. All you have to do is to compare Mark to Matthew and Luke, and you will see that 90% of Mark is reproduced and very often copied into Matthew and Luke. And Luke admits it. At the beginning of Luke's gospel, he actually admits that he uses other sources. And there's some commentary out there that says there was a saying source document that floated around for the first 30 years. We lost the saying source document, but it got incorporated into Matthew and Luke. And John was done independently of the other two. And so you have John, the guy who wrote the Revelation, John the Revelator, John the son of Zebedee, who wrote his own documentation around the life of Jesus, and the nature of them is very different. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are stories with an action point. John's a sermon. And so when you read the style, you read the structure, you see that Matthew, Mark, and Luke, well, they're called synoptic, which means optic is eye, soon is together. Synoptic means seeing together. And so Matthew, Mark, and Luke were the first, how do you say this? They're storyteller gospels, and the stories have an action point with an application. John, he's assuming you want a sermon and you want to listen there. In fact, it's kind of fun. There's Bibles called red letter Bibles. And if you're reading John, you can't tell where Jesus is talking and then John starts preaching. It sort of fades one into the other. So I don't know where the red should end and the black should start. It's just it's this interesting kind of thing.
You brought up a huge point that I would like you to speak to, and that is, and I'm not sure if this is true in the Canadian world, but it certainly is true in a segment of the United States world, is that the teachings of Jesus, of what actually came, those red letter moments in the Bible that came out of his mouth, are discounted because they don't speak to the narrative that some people are trying to create. As a matter of fact, when Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, they're like, I don't, only if they're white and heterosexual do I love them as much. You understand what I'm saying?
Every culture in the history of the world, not just America, has decided they like some of the teaching and not the rest.
They're like, well, I don't even like myself, so I'm not going to like them either.
Well, I don't know about that, but I can just say this to you. Listen, every culture on the earth has beauty in it. Every culture. I have been, so far I've preached in 23 nations. I'm going to add 2 more this year. And I will tell you something. There is marvel and beauty and glory in every culture. And there's evil and there's structural desecration, and there's undercurrents of things that are bad and ugly in every culture as well. And in fact, I can just say this. I'll speak not about America, but about Nazi Germany. Let's go to that one. In Nazi Germany, the Lutheran Church was paid, the wages of the pastors in the Lutheran Church were paid by the state. In fact, they still have state church funds that go to pay the pastors in that tradition. It was easier to cooperate with the Nazis than it was to correct them. And so there was a whole segment of Lutheran Nazis who cooperated with the Nazis, Lutheran pastors who did. And of course, the reason why Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote The Cost of Discipleship was because he wanted to form something contrary to that, because the Bible was telling him that what was happening with the Nazis was evil. Every time people cooperate with a structural power in the name of the gospel loses. Every time you separate the gospel from the state, you see the gospel correcting the culture instead of partnering with the culture. In fact, have you read? I don't know if you read the Book of Revelation. I have the funniest story about the Book of Revelation. So the first person who came to faith in Christ in my church was a young man. He was like 19. His name was Rob, and he said, "What should I do, Pastor?" I said, "I think you should read John." He said, "Oh, okay." A week later, I find him, and he looks scared. I said,
if you've read Revelations, there's no way of not being scared.
He read the revelation of John instead of John. He said, I said, "What did you do?" He said, "Pastor, I read the revelation." I said, "What happened?" He said, "Oh, God is mad. And when he comes back, we're all going to get it." Anyway, the book itself revolves around John the Revelator sitting on an island in exile. And he's writing to 7 different churches. And the whole point of what he's saying is Jesus is speaking through John to those churches and telling them that they're supposed to talk about who he is to the culture of those cities to transform the culture of those cities. Only 2 of the 7 succeeded. So a church called Philadelphia succeeded and a church called Smyrna succeeded. The other 5 were a mess. They were cooperating more or less with the state itself, and the gospel was getting polluted and turning inward, and those churches were more a reflection of the culture than they were of Jesus. In fact, I would say that those 7 churches are supposed to, each one of them, be a revelation of Jesus and his love and his grace to a city, instead of the city polluting the church. That's the whole point of the book. In fact, when I want to have fun, I'm introducing it, I'll say, listen, I want to tell you about the book of Revelation. I want you to say this: bad, bad, good, good, slimy, slimy, wow. And they'll say, "Oh, why do you?" So listen, you say good, you say bad, you say bad, you say good, you say. So I get the whole congregation to say it, and then they yell it back to me. This is work in an independent church and not a sacramental one. Anyway, they say bad, bad, good, good, slimy. Then everybody stand up and yell, "Wow!" They're saying, "Why are you doing that?" I said, "Because the book is chiastic. It means the big truths in the middle. You have a big truth at the beginning, a big truth at the end, and the biggest truth smack dab in the middle. There's 7 churches, 2 bad, 2 good, 3 mixed, and a great big promise in the middle one. Bad, bad, good, good, slimy, slimy. Wow." So compromise with the culture is always the heresy of the church. It doesn't matter what age or stage you're in. That has been so all the way from the beginning of the resurrection of Jesus through to the present day. I don't care if you're talking about communist China or if you're talking about Paraguay or if you're talking about the United States. The churches that are most effective are the ones that let the gospel correct the culture rather than to be corrected or imbibed or imbued with the culture. Now, here's the problem. Everybody likes their own comfort zone. Thank you very much.
Part of the human condition. By the way,
Yes.
we're talking with Dr. David Chotka. Aha, I said it.
You said it right.
And by the way, you mentioned Nazi Germany, and do you remember the quote that Robin Williams gave about them?
Listen, I like Robin Williams, but you have to remind me of the quote.
Somebody asked him because he was going to Germany for a comedy tour, and the person said, "Well, you know, in Germany they don't seem to have much of a sense of humor." And he said, "Well, maybe that's because they killed all the funny people." And we need to take a break, and we'll be right back right after this. You're listening to Positive Talk Radio Network. We're on a mission to entertain, enlighten, empower, and educate through inspiring music, dynamic conversations, and yes, laughter. Join me, Kevin McDonald, and Brichelle as we declare our freedom from hate, division, and fear and celebrate a better way of living. Go to positivetalkradio.net to find out more. Here's another point to ponder from Positive Talk Radio. What is the easiest thing to justify? It is a small transgression. The one no one will ever see, no one will ever know. The tiny exaggeration on the expense report. The extra minute you took on your lunch break. The packaging you tossed in the wrong recycle bin because it was closer. In those moments, the question isn't, will I get caught? The question is, will I know? It isn't about avoiding punishment. It's a silent agreement you make with yourself when you choose to do the right thing. To return the wallet. To fix the mistake. To respect the empty space. You aren't impressing the world. You're earning your own respect. That small choice, made entirely in private, is how you build a life you never have to look away from. The only audience that matters is you. And welcome back to Positive Talk. My name is Kevin. Brichelle's right there. And Dr. David, since the last time you were on the show, these are new that we've created, these points to ponder. What did you think of that one?
Points to ponder. What did I think of? Which? Oh, the point from Robin Williams, you mean? That? Oh, I see.
The one that I just did about integrity.
About him killing all the funny people.
Well, he honestly, he said that. He said it on the Johnny Carson show.
Yeah, he would expand the basis of humor. Robin Williams' genius was that he would just go outside the orbit of the ordinary on a regular basis. So
he did. He was extraordinary.
Yes, he was. He had a real gift. I remember when I first watched him. I'm old enough to remember Mork and Mindy when it started.
Me too.
That's most disturbing. Brichelle doesn't even have a faint clue what we're talking about.
I heard of it, but
well, he would be, and I remember him on the Ron Howard show with him and Fonzie.
Yes. Now that was just once, I think, wasn't it? Just
yes, that was the basis for him developing that character further for Mork and Mindy.
Okay, now I did not know that little bit of trivia, but you're right. Listen, all through history, people who, well, how do I say this in a way that's going to speak to your audience? there's always been people on the edge, and they're the ones who invite us to consider things that we've not thought of before. Humor does that. In fact, the best weapon you can use against people who are oppressive is to make them laugh at themselves. And so Robin Williams did that in a marvelous way. By the way, I like to use humor all the time. I don't know if you've noticed. This is the way that I preach, actually.
I would love to hear you behind the pulpit, because I think that you would be a lot of fun to listen to.
Well, you can. I just did a 10-week series for a local pastor. He went on sabbatical. And if you go to wcf.ca, that's Windsor Christian Fellowship.ca, which is Canada, CA. CA. I did a 10-week series on the Lord's Prayer from January to March. And if you want to listen to that, you could hear me preach one week after another for 10 consecutive weeks on that theme.
And Rochelle, what do you have to say for yourself?
There's a lot going through my mind in the power of understanding things. We hear a lot of things. We're not really understanding them. I know that being here in the last 2 years with Kevin, I heard things over and over and over and over and over. And then there was that spark, that moment. Preaching has got to be so humbling in that way of getting to look out at so many people and see what they're going through while you're preaching this message or talking to them or whatever it is. How do you stay focused rather than wanting to engage with everybody? And do you give that option also at the end of where you are at your church to just be able to talk to you and meet with people where they're at?
Well, okay, if you have 800 people in front of you, you can't do a one-to-one with 800 people.
Yeah.
But you can do a small group. You can write a statement. You can ask questions. And I do that kind of thing. In fact, I'm going to be launching a Bible study tonight, and I have Zoom classes that I teach. And usually there's about 20 people or something in that. And there's lots of one-to-one time in those kinds of contexts. So when you're preaching, the best way to engage someone is to use story. And actually, that's what Jesus of Nazareth did. In fact, the reason why the Gospels have continued. Listen, I can walk up to almost anybody in my country and in yours and say, so-and-so was a good Samaritan. Mm-hmm. And they won't even have a second's hesitation knowing, they went out of their way to help someone in trouble. They say, well, do you know that's the Bible? They'll say, the Bible? That's the Bible. Where's that? What's this? The parable of the Good Samaritan is in the Gospel of Luke. I remember when Charlie Brown's Christmas came out, Linus got up in front of everybody and he said, let me tell you a story. And they told about the births of Christmas. And people still watch that thing every year. It came out in the 1960s and to the present day. They like it because it's a story about ordinary life with the truth of the gospel infused in the story. And it's the most effective way to do this. So when you're talking to people in a church, you have to assume that they're coming because they want to. Now, every now and then, you'll get the reluctant husband. You'll get the nasty teenager, right?
When I was a kid, you mean there was a choice?
Yeah, you drag this. In this culture, in current culture, most people who show up want to be there, or they're curious because they don't know, right? And in fact, the person who was my admin assistant, a lady named Tennille, didn't know anything about the Bible. She sold me a car. And she wound up asking me, so here's what happened. I needed a new car for my son. He had moved from one city to another, and we had lived in Alberta, and this is Southern Ontario. That's like Montana to Detroit, just to put that in perspective for your American audience. So anyway, he got a job with a roofing company, and the car that I had given him before went the way of all flesh in the driveway when I pulled it up. And so I went to a meeting, and there was an ad for a 2-year lease return at a dealership. I called the dealership and I asked if the person there could tell me about that used car, and we started a conversation. And here's what happened. Over the course of the next few days, it became clear he wasn't going to be able to make payments regularly because it was a roofing company and they laid off for the winter, et cetera, et cetera. So we were trying to figure out the car. So we made a decision to give him our old car and we'd buy the new one, kind of thing. That's what parents do for kids. And they swallow hard, and then pay more money. Anyway, so this lady sees us changing our minds about the kind of car we want for several days. And then she looked at me and she said, what do you do for a living? I said, I'm a pastor. She said, you can't be a pastor. I said, why not? She said, you're laughing all the time. Pastors don't laugh. Anyway, she said, well, how did you go into the ministry? I said, well, do you really want to know? She said, yeah. So I told her a story. Now, here's the story, and it's an amazing one. My dad was an agnostic or an atheist, depending on the day. If there was this great big catastrophic thing where lots of people died all at once, he was an atheist because good and bad suffered together. If he watched something grow, he was an agnostic, and he'd say, oh, there's got to be something there because life doesn't come from nothing. And he had this, we had this conversation going on, and then I became a definitive Christian. And that led to interesting family dynamics. Yes. And in the middle of this, I remember one night I was standing by the refrigerator, getting ready to go upstairs to my bed. Mom and Dad had to get up early because they ran a restaurant. So I was standing with my dad, and I said, Dad, all my marks are about 1% different from the rest. I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. And he giggled and laughed, and he said, well, son, go to sleep and you'll wake up and you'll know. He went off to bed, and I woke up the next day and I realized I was going to be a pastor. I don't know how I knew it. I just knew it. And I went through all the hoops, and this was a most amazing thing. Within 2 weeks, everything that was required by the denomination I was in was satisfied in a process that usually took 2 years. It happened like in, I think it was 10 days total, something like within a 2-week window. And remember, at the end of the 2 weeks, I was helping my dad clean up in the restaurant, and I was mopping the floor, and he always had a cigarette hanging out of his mouth and a shot of whiskey sitting on the counter.
That was like a restaurant that I know.
Yeah, well, sure, it was a diner, right? It was a diner. We had 5 apartments in the diner, and it was honest work. I got to meet a lot of people. That's where I learned how to tell stories, is the diner. Anyway, so I said, Dad, you remember when we were standing by the fridge and I told you I didn't know what to do? And he said, yeah. I said, well, I've made a decision. And he said, what are you going to be, a doctor, a lawyer, a dentist? This is the conversation of an immigrant with a child. And I said, no, I'm going to be a pastor. The cigarette dropped out of his mouth. He turned white and said, we have to talk. I said, when? He said, right after we're done. So we finished the restaurant. We cleaned up. Every night we had to mop the floors and take the grease off the fans and clean the counters and so on. Got that done. Went home, and he took that shot of whiskey. He had a shot, and he said, do you remember what you went upstairs and I went to bed? I said, yeah. I said, well, this is what happened. I went to sleep. Your mother was fast asleep already. We had to get up at 4:30 to open the restaurant for 6. And I got into bed, and the risen Lord appeared to me. And he's an agnostic. And he went over to me and said, wake up your son, David, ask him what he dreams and tell him the following things. And he described that I would be someone who would travel the earth and write books and so on and so forth. So my dad gets out of bed. He's in this deluded state where he is just awake from a dream or something like this. He races up, tries to shake me awake. I don't wake up. And then he comes to himself and says, that's nuts. That's the nuttiest dream I ever had in my life. I don't even believe in that. He went back down into his bed. The Lord reappeared to him, grabbed him by the shirt cuffs, stood him on his feet, and said, go wake your son, David. The dream is fading. Ask him what he dreams. And my dad said, go away. I said, no, you have to go. So he raced up, and I don't remember this part. He shook me awake. Apparently, I dreamed the same thing that he was told, and he repeated this call to me. While I was in this groggy, semi-awake state, I went back to sleep, woke up the next day, and started the process. But the miracle was that, well, first of all, it was a miracle that he even did it because he just didn't believe at that point in the game. But the other thing was, I didn't like my denomination. I thought it was too stiff. I know you and I have had that chat, Kevin. You thought it was too stiff and too rigid and brain dead. Anyway, and I'll just tell you this. The pastor was a wonderful guy. He would visit anybody. You could call him any hour of the day or night, and he would show up. He was a pastoral care pastor. He was a lousy preacher. It was boring, just boring being in that place. So I went in to see a guidance counselor, and the guidance counselor said, I said, what do you want to do? He said, I think I'm going to be a pastor. He said, what denomination? I told him. And he said, well, you going to go there? I said, I don't like it. He said, well, why don't you come to my church and talk to my pastor? I said, oh, okay. And it was the same denomination. And And, it was an English guy who smoked a pipe and stuck his feet on the desk and blew smoke rings while he talked about faith in God. See? So I was really struck by this fellow. And I said, well, I'd like to come here and I could start the process. It's my denomination. He said, no. Go back to where you're from. You got to bloom where you're planted. So the next day I went to see the pastor of my church, of the church that my parents went to. And he looked at me and he said, good to see you, David. I've been praying for a year. You're going into the ministry. I said, how did you know? He said, I've been praying about it for a year. I know you're going into the ministry. I said, but I showed no interest at all. I said, yes, that's right. But you're going into the ministry. The elders meet tonight. This church is 100 years old. It's the centennial year. We haven't had a candidate for the ministry in 20 years. Why don't we make you our centennial candidate? You can be approved by the elder board. They meet tonight. Do you want me to do that? Then there was a psychological exam, and then there was a fitness for ministry exam, and there was another committee for psychiatric evaluation. And they actually passed me. All three of those teams passed me, plus the sanction from my church. Ordinarily, that's 2 years. It was 10 days. And when it was done, my dad was shocked, absolutely, totally, completely shocked, because it was the substance of that dreamlike vision thing that happened to him in the middle of the night, when he was trying to get up early to go open the restaurant the next day. So that was the call. And it was the beginning of it. There's many more stories that's what I just did. I told you stories. See? And I held your attention because I was telling you a story about divine encounter. And listen, people will have theories about everything. We're going to disagree about something sooner or later. But when you tell a story, you go, and it's a real human story that goes underneath the emotion and works through all of the different levels of what it means to believe. The encounter becomes different because the story is a genuine expression of who you are in the presence of the other. And people can engage with the story. Does that make sense to you?
It does. But Dr. David, I've got to ask you a question.
Okay, you always do.
I know. What is the difference between... See, my brother used to do this a lot to me. He would say, well, us believers... And I wanted to smack him every time he said that. But what's the difference between a belief and knowing?
Oh, that's a good question. Why is that? That's what's more important, breathing in or breathing out?
Kevin, let's take our last break and give him a moment to think about it. And everybody, please make sure that you're looking at everything that Dr. David has to offer for us. And remember, it's Uga Chaka. So David Chotka at spiritequip.com. I love that you have events and teaching and that you're going all over and having these experiences and learning about these people. So maybe that will help you answer Kevin's question.
Oh, I'm sure. Oh, he's already got an answer. I've interviewed him before.
You should, before you go take a break, restate the question so I can think about it for 60 seconds. What is the difference between belief?
What's the difference between belief and knowing?
Okay.
Why is it, do you suppose, that we are our own harshest critics, maintaining a standard for ourselves that we would never demand of a friend? We mistake self-criticism for discipline, but real growth requires a different environment, one of self-compassion. When we quiet the internal judge, we find the clarity and the energy we need to actually improve. True strength begins with the peace you make with yourself. And Rochelle, go ahead.
And welcome back to Positive Talk Radio, everybody, with the one and only Kevin McDonald, myself, and our amazing guest today, welcoming us back, Dr. David Chotka. Make sure you're visiting everything he has to offer through his teachings at spiritequip.com. I love that you use the word spirit. So, Kevin, your question was...
And let me preface this question by saying this, is that you are a man of faith.
Yes.
You are a man of belief.
Yes.
But I don't think that's true. I think you're a man of knowing. From your perspective, you know the things that you talk about to be true. And so when you have a knowing, it's different than a belief, isn't it?
Well, it depends on what you mean by belief. If you mean belief as a body of doctrine, or if you mean belief as an overarching kind of thing, I don't know if that's the same as what you mean by knowing. I don't.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm
Go
not.
ahead.
I need you to define what you mean by belief versus knowing, so I can understand your question.
When I say belief, I've run across a lot of people who say I believe, but they don't, or I believe and maybe they do some. But there's a difference between when you know for a fact versus a belief, which is a theoretical thing that may be true or may be some definition a little bit differently. But as an example, when you,
You just answered your own question.
Yes, you did.
It's the truth and it's not truth. You can believe anything you want. I can sit here and tell you right now that this water bottle is bright pink. And I believe that. But what's the knowing of it? It's not. So is it the knowledge and faith combined that creates the knowledge to know rather than believe?
Well, okay. So the word faith is in Greek is actually the word pistis, and it means this. It means not just a body of doctrine, but it means implicit trust and absolute surrender to the object of your conviction. And so to know is, that's faith. But the way we talk about the faith, and we say, well, there's that Catholic over there with the faith. There's that Lutheran over there with the faith. There's a Buddhist over there with his faith. There's a Muslim over there with his faith. The New Testament speaks about encounter as the basis for faith in harmony with Scripture. And so actually, I just told you about my dad meeting the Lord. It was the most amazing thing. He was a bouncer in a strip joint. And his two sisters ran the strip joint, and it was a great. How do I say this? It was a shame when I was glad that they were his sisters, so their last name wasn't the same. Do you know what I'm saying? That's the degradation. No, it's the degradation of what it means to be female, what it means to be human. Yep. You're turning the woman into an object of your own self gratification, and it leads to the destruction of everything that's good and lovely and so on. But my two aunts ran the place. And, for Christmas, I had to go and decorate the Christmas tree in the strip joint. So this is what do you believe? It smelled of smoke, it smelled of booze, and it smelled of sex. It was this, and it was the objectification of all things female. And when I became a believer, I had to speak to my two aunts in a way that was respectful to them. And at the same time say, what you're doing isn't good. It was a really hard line to walk. And I was a young buck. I was in my teens when I became a believer. And I hadn't had much life experience. And I didn't know about what it was like to go through all kinds of trial like our previous generation did. The previous generation, to me, suffered. This one lives in a culture of much more privilege and much more opportunity and so on and so forth. And so it was a very different kind of way of speaking. But when I met the Lord, and my two aunts and my dad had been in this other ambiance, I had to say, this is what I believe. And it meant I knew it. So, wasn't it? They wouldn't take an intellectual argument. An intellectual argument would not convince them. That would not do the job. And a body of doctrine would not convince them. It had to be an encounter. And it had
to tie in
genuine knowing. You had to know beyond all knowing that what you believed was in fact truth. So listen, if your water bottle's pink and everybody around you says the water bottle's crystal clear, and there are 17 people who are telling you it's crystal clear and you're saying it's pink, well, you can continue in your delusion if you want, but it isn't true.
Well, there's also emotion tied to that, because when you experience something, it's not just in your head, it's a feeling, it's something real. It becomes real, right, Kevin? Is that do you get what I'm saying?
Say that again.
When you feel something rather than just think it becomes more real.
Yes.
Okay.
In fact,
you both
I said yes first. I win.
I almost forgot what I was saying.
Yeah, to believe
Okay.
is not just to have cognitive assent. To
Yeah,
believe is to engage with the body of doctrine until it becomes lived reality.
which is all yourself, your brain, your body,
Yes.
and your soul.
Well, listen, there's a doctrine in the Christian church called the incarnation. And listen, there's a group out there called Calvinists, and there's a group out there called Arminians. And the Calvinists hold to a formulation that believes in something called total depravity, which means, it doesn't mean you're an axe murderer because I think you're a nice girl, right? So maybe I should say nice lady. Was I paternalistic?
Whatever you believe. I'm
Okay.
just kidding.
They would say that there's no part of what it means to be human that is not tainted with this thing called sin. And so the best thing you can do is not achieve. And
Right.
that if you go to a Baptist church or a Presbyterian church or a Calvinist church of any kind, they'll hold to that doctrine. On the other side of the equation is this doctrine called the incarnation, where God entered into human flesh in a human named Jesus. And here's what it means. There's no part of what it means to be human that has not been touched by the divine.
Mhm.
And the transformation of the human into that which is good and holy and true and right is always before us as a divine possibility. Now that's Positive Talk Radio. So now those two doctrines are true because nobody's going to deny this. There's evil in the world.
Yeah.
All you have to do is look at the war right now in Iran. Okay, there was a bunch of schoolgirls killed, and look at the war in Ukraine. My background's Ukrainian. I'm 100%. Both my parents were Ukrainian, and so that war right now has been going on for 4 years, and there have been people murdered and all kinds of infrastructure destroyed. And now the Ukraine is pushing back, and to push back, they have to kill people. And there's this thing called evil. On the other side of that, there's this magnificent reality called goodness. And if you don't bring in those two things into balance, your goodness is cheap if it doesn't address evil. Your evil is delusional if it doesn't acknowledge the existence of that which is good and right and true. And so in the Christian faith, you have these total depravity types, and you got these, Positive Talk guys on the other side. It's the melding of the two that produces the truth in an encounter that's real.
And in some cases, you have people that profess to be believers who are pedophiles. Some of them are priests.
Yes, it is. That's true. So that's why I don't travel alone. Because no, I'm serious.
I don't blame you.
I don't blame you at all. Scary. The scariest.
Yeah, the bottom line is if you travel alone, you're going to be in a situation one night where you're an idiot. Let's just admit that. If you travel in company, you'll keep each other company, and you won't trip over your own shoelaces. But the point is, if you don't acknowledge that evil exists, then good has nothing by which it can be compared, and the vice versa is also true. And so the point of the gospel is not to whitewash. In fact, I'm teaching a course on evil starting tonight. I'm doing that. It's April 16. I'm doing it on Zoom. And the reason I'm doing it is because when you read the Gospels, if you took evil out of the Gospels, you just have a namby-pamby preacher who went around patting hands and doing nice things. And that's not what the Bible's about at all. It's about Jesus of Nazareth entering the human condition in a conquered culture where people had been brutally murdered. And the instrument of salvation is this thing called a cross, which was an instrument of torture developed by the Carthaginians, brought to Rome and then to Greece, imported to that country. 100 years before Jesus rose from the dead or died on that cross, 800 of their leaders were publicly crucified in the city of Jerusalem on those things called crosses all over the city. Everyone in Jerusalem knew that that was an instrument of abominable torture and a heinous way to die. And so for God to enter into the human condition and to get killed on that and then rise from that is a message about entering into that which is destructive and horrible and evil and torturous, and God conquering in the middle of that. That's good news.
Sounds like this thing we call life, Dr. David.
Yes, it is. Life and death and life again. I do believe in an afterlife. Now, Kevin and I were having this chat once.
Good.
About whether or not Vladimir Putin was going to make it to heaven. Do you remember that? We had that, and Hitler too. We were asking that question the last time we were on the program.
Yes, we were. Yes, we were.
And my answer is there has to be a judgment. There has to be for there to be justice in a moral universe. There has to be a judgment.
Why?
Why? You want Vlad Putin to go into glory, shining and glorious after he's killed 1.3 million of his own people and destroyed a nation and
Because
conquered a nation state?
because that's not who he is at his soul level.
Well, that's what he's chosen to believe. I can go back. He knows and he believes that to be a dictator is the end.
That is, that's interesting. I wonder if when we do make that transition, if we go through more of those points in that moment than we do in our whole lives. So we'll talk about that next time.
Yes, I will. We've run out of doctor. We've run out of time, and we're just getting good. Dang it! And because and we lost Rochelle.
That's pretty good.
Exactly. And Dr. David, give us all of your books and your website again so that we can send people there.
Sure. Well, the most recent one is just released today. It's called Mark My Words. It'll be available anywhere books are sold. Mark, my words, and it's a paraphrase, and it's an interpretive analysis of Mark's gospel. That's how I could answer you so quickly on which gospel was the first. This is the one that was just done on the Lord's Prayer. It's a short form, and it's designed. It assumes that you don't know anything about the Lord's Prayer, and it's a short little book with a 2-week study, and it's got a video in it. So you click on a QR code. Yeah, you click on the QR code at the front of the book. You'll get 10 minutes of my instruction for your small group, and you do 4 sessions with this. And the intention here is to make it possible for you to understand the content of the Lord's Prayer so you can pray it with intelligence and wisdom. This one is the fruit of my doctoral work. And I like the title. Hey, are you there? It's me, God. How to listen, test, and know when God speaks. And it's got a foreword by Jack Canfield, the Chicken Soup for the Soul author. And so
I've interviewed Mark Victor Hansen, and who is the other author of Chicken Soup, and they're great human beings.
Yes, and they're storytellers, and that book is full of story. So it talks about how God speaks through through implementation of story, and I compare that to the biblical texts, which tell us how God speaks. So those are the big 3. Those are the big 3.
And you're a wonderful man, young man. And I don't know, when do you sleep, by the way?
Oh, I just lie around till midnight 6. Don't do much. No, I'm a writer, and I love to be with people, and I love to share the gospel. And I've been given opportunity to travel the earth, and I'm thankful for that.
Well, that was predestined. They told you that before.
Yeah, I chose
to. And your dad, your dad, I'm assuming, is passed on.
He did pass on. Yes, he died about 10 years ago. Yeah.
And to his dying day, I bet you he was so proud of you for the man that you had become.
Well, I'm thankful for that. I have 2 brothers as well, and of course, he's proud of all 3 of us. And
of course,
but it was a very important thing for him to have his own encounter with God, because he didn't believe until he did, and then his life changed. I'm thankful for that. And
you will see him when it's your time to go, and you'll see him again.
Yeah, I'll see him in glory. You'll see. I don't know what that is, but hey, that's fine.
Young man, you take care. You take care of yourself, because we all go home. And from my humble opinion, we all go home. There are certain let me see. If she there are certain conditions that some people put on it. I put none on it. And so, and maybe next time we can talk about that. That would be
delighted to come back.
I would love to have you back, because our conversations are always fruitful and they multiply.
Well, be fruitful and multiply then. That's a good thing to say.
Take care, Dr. Chotka, and you have a wonderful day, and thank you so much. And enjoy the Canadian weather. I hope it's great up there.
God bless. Have a great day.
Thank you for being part of Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald, where stories inspire and voices remind us of what truly matters. May today's conversation give you hope, courage, and a reason to keep moving forward. And just remember, till next time, be kind to one another, because each other's all we've got.